Ignite. Innovative Impulse für die Verlagsbranche.
Herzlich willkommen zu Ignite Publishing, dem Podcast, der sich den Innovationen aus der Verlagswelt widmet. Das ist die 10. Folge, Albrecht. Bist du sehr nervös?
Auf jeden Fall. 10 ist eine Dekade. Naja, so fast. Aber halt viel.
Klingt viel. Eine Staffel, die wir gerade abgeschlossen haben, ja. Denke ich auch. Und dann auch mit einem sehr schönen Thema, das dich als Vater sicherlich auch häufig beschäftigt. Es geht um Kinder- und Jugendliteratur und das Ganze im Audioformat.
Ja, super spannend. Ich bin gespannt. Es geht halt auch darum, wie kann Audio für Kinder aussehen, wenn ich es richtig verstanden habe, Daniel. Und die Kinder hören ja auch, bevor sie lesen. Also deshalb finde ich das vielleicht so eine Art, in Anführungszeichen, Einstieg in die ganz große, weite Welt des Lesens, dieses Audio für Kinder.
In der Tat. Und unser Gast heute ist Carla Herbertson. Ich hoffe, dass ich den Namen richtig ausgesprochen habe. Sie betreibt eine Audio Consultancy und Production Company in England. Also sie berät Verlage darin, Audiomedien auf den Weg zu bringen und zu produzieren. Kommt aus dem Radio und das Interessante an ihr, und das ist auch unser Hauptthema in dem Gespräch, ist das Thema Audio First. Und das ist tatsächlich ein Thema, was in der Verlagsbranche so richtig sträflich bis jetzt vernachlässigt worden ist.
Was dazu ja auch hervorragend passt, ist halt auch der Inhalt von unserer Data-Doc. Veronika, was hat sie denn heute für uns mitgebracht, Daniel?
Heute geht es um eine Zahl aus dem Playlist-Marketing, dass sie unser Data-Doc natürlich passend zum heutigen Thema des Podcasts ausgewählt hat. Und wir freuen uns auf ihre zweite Folge als Data-Doc und hören da jetzt mal rein.
Hallo zusammen, hier ist wieder euer Data-Doc Veronika. Und natürlich habe ich euch auch heute wieder eine spannende Zahl aus meiner Praxis mitgebracht. Das letzte Mal haben wir uns ja damit beschäftigt, wie man heute noch Leser erreichen kann und festgestellt, dass man als Verlag sein Publikum vielleicht doch anders ansprechen bzw. vermehrt auf Sichtbarkeit setzen muss. Daher habe ich euch mal heute eine Zahl mitgebracht, die zeigt, wie man Sichtbarkeit für seine Verlagsprodukte sinnvoll produzieren kann. Da es geht nicht nur um Aufmerksamkeit, sondern auch darum, dass die Inhalte am Ende gekauft und genutzt werden. Ein aus meiner Sicht wunderbares Beispiel dafür ist Lismio. Denn hier kann ich heute einfach mal die riesige Zahl 1,6 Millionen in den Raum werfen. Genauer, auf Spotify haben die 2400 Lismio-Playlists insgesamt genau diese Anzahl an FollowerInnen. 1,6 Millionen. Die Plattform Lismio zeigt uns ja hier auf wunderbare Weise, wie einfach und doch effektiv Sichtbarkeit für Verlagsprodukte geschaffen werden kann. In diesem Fall für Hörbücher und Hörspiele in Richtung Endverbraucher. Durch das Erstellen von thematischen und kuratierten Playlists aus den auf Lismio verfügbaren Hörbüchern aller teilnehmender Verlage wird so eine immense Reichweite produziert, die diese Hörbücher insgesamt auf Spotify richtig gut sichtbar macht. Playlist-Marketing an sich ist ja eigentlich keine neue Erfindung, denn in der Musik arbeitet man echt schon lange damit. Aber nun beginnt diese Marketingform eben auch im Hörbuch immer mehr an Relevanz zu gewinnen. Vor allem auch im Hinblick auf Streamingdienste wie zum Beispiel Spotify. Die Strategie, die dabei die Zielsetzung ist natürlich klar, die Reichweite von Musik beziehungsweise auch Hörbüchern zu erhöhen, indem man sie eben auf diesen Wiedergabelisten von diesen Musikstreaming-Plattformen platziert. Ziel ist eben klar, Sichtbarkeit schaffen, weil wir die Inhalte so einem richtig breiten Publikum zugänglich machen. Und wir schaffen es auch, neue Hörer dadurch anzusprechen, die an ähnlichen Produkten oder Themen interessiert sind. Und nicht zuletzt haben wir eben dann auch die Möglichkeit, eine Fangemeinde aufzubauen und, was wir natürlich alle wollen, insgesamt Streams und Verkäufe steigern. Also, die Zahl von Lismio zeigt genau das und damit auch, wie wir mit bereits sehr niedrigschwelligen Mitteln Sichtbarkeit für Hörbücher schaffen können. Es braucht eben nicht immer gleich das riesige Marketingbudget, um genau das zu erreichen. Und in diesem Sinne mache ich mich nun wieder auf, für euch die nächste spannende Zahl aufzutun.
Vielen Dank an der Stelle an unseren Data-Doc. Bevor es jetzt weitergeht mit dem Gespräch mit Carla und unserem Thema Audio First Publishing, haben wir noch ein anderes Thema für euch. Es geht um KI im Publishing, speziell um eine Kooperation von QualiFiction und Zebralution Digital Publishing. Was es damit auf sich hat, das habe ich mir von Ralf Winkler, Gründer von QualiFiction, und Ralf Biesemeier, den ihr schon kennt, dem Managing Director von Zebralution Digital Publishing, erklären lassen. Wir hören jetzt einen Auszug aus dem Gespräch. Das komplette Gespräch findet ihr in unserem Ignite Publishing Channel unter ignite-publishing.de. Ich sage herzlich willkommen Ralf Biesemeier und Ralf Winkler.
Hallo. Hallo.
Wir sprechen gleich über eine Kooperation zwischen QualiFiction und Zebralution. Bevor wir so weit sind, würde ich von euch erstmal gerne wissen, wie und wann habt ihr denn KI für euch eigentlich entdeckt? Ist sicherlich schon ein paar Jahre her.
Ja, das ist bei mir tatsächlich schon eine Weile her. Ich kann mich erinnern, dass es 2009 war. Ich glaube, damals hieß KI noch nicht KI, sondern es war quasi Algorithmik oder wissenschaftliches Programmieren, hieß es damals noch. Das war etwas sperrig. Das war in einem medizintechnischen Kontext. Ich hatte damals, das war mein erster Job, Software programmiert für meine medizintechnische Firma, wo es darum ging, in Bilddatensätzen Strukturen zu erkennen, also Tumoren zu erkennen oder die Organe zu segmentieren. Und ja, war eine ganz spannende Zeit, weil es eben gerade so auf der Kante war zu der Zeit, wo man dann mit schwerem Geschütz, mit KI-Methoden angerückt ist, später mal nach 3 Jahren. Aber damals war es noch ein bisschen Handarbeit und eine ganz nette Zeit. Ja.
Das heißt, du hast in dem Sinne gar keinen klassischen Publishing-Hintergrund, sondern kommst eher aus einer anderen Welt.
Ganz genau, so kann man sagen. Danach war ich dann noch ein paar Jahre bei Zalando. Das war dann eher ökonomisch geprägt, im Sinne von Abverkaufsvorhersagen. Also wie verkauft sich der Schuh oder wie teuer darf der Schuh eigentlich sein, damit er sich noch gut verkauft bis zum Saisonende, und war eher ökonomischer. Und dann aber 2017 dann doch der Sprung in die literarische IT-Welt, und das war eine ganz, ganz gute Entscheidung, würde ich sagen, für mich.
Was euch ja verbindet, Ralf Biesemeier, ne? Auch du bist ja sozusagen, auch wenn man sich kaum noch dran erinnern kann, auch mal ein Quereinsteiger gewesen.
Ich in meinen 25 Jahren. Ist aber auch gar nicht so lange her. Genau. Auch meine ersten Erfahrungen mit KI, eigentlich ganz ähnlich wie bei Ralf auch. Aber noch länger her, irgendwie so um die Jahrtausendwelle tatsächlich. Da war ich mal einer der ersten Mitarbeiter in einem Spin-off der Ruhr-Uni in Bochum. Da ging es um neuronale Netze, in denen da geforscht wurde, und hat man aus dem Forschungsunternehmen, das es gab, hat man eine AG gemacht, die sich nachher um Sicherheit in der Zutrittskontrolle mit Biometrie gekümmert hat und um Auflichtmikroskopie, also Hautkrebserkennung. Und da ging es auch um große Datenbanken und Mustererkennung und viel um Algorithmik und, wie gesagt, neuronale Netze. Hat damals auch noch nicht unter KI firmiert, aber war schon das, was es eigentlich ist, ehrlich gesagt. So, da sind meine ersten Erfahrungen so her.
Viele, viele Jahre später ist das Thema KI jetzt in der Publishing-Welt auch angekommen. Allerdings von der Durchdringung her sicherlich auch noch ein bisschen ausbaufähig, wenn man sich die Verlage anschaut. Was würdet ihr denn Verlagen empfehlen, die jetzt gerade ihre ersten KI-Schritte unternehmen wollen? In welchem Bereich sollten die ihre ersten Testballons starten?
Ist echt gar keine einfache Aufgabe. Ich glaube, man muss starten. Ich glaube, was wirklich wichtig ist, aber den Rahmen richtig zu setzen, es ist ja so ein bisschen Wilder Westen, ne? Also je nachdem, wer Betreiber ist, wo sitzt. In den USA ist das Rechtempfinden für Urheberrechte und so jetzt vielleicht nicht sonderlich ausgeprägt in der richtigen Richtung so. Da muss man ein bisschen gucken, wo man die Daten lässt und vielleicht auch Regeln aufstellen. Aber ich glaube, dass es einfach wichtig ist, eine Erfahrung zu machen und auch mit verfügbaren Tools. Ich bin auf so einem Newsletter drauf, unserem Service, dann ist there's an AI for that, DAFT oder so. Da gehe ich jeden Tag ein Newsletter mit irgendwie 20 neuen Sachen, die es gibt. Das ist eigentlich nicht zu verarbeiten. Und man muss halt irgendwo anfangen, ne, und muss sich seine Erfahrung machen. Dann merkt man relativ schnell, was ganz gut ist, wo es noch hakt, so. Und ChatGPT, klar, ne, so ist vielleicht der beste Einstieg, damit mal zu starten und das in seinen Arbeitsalltag irgendwie einzubauen. Dann kriegt man ein Gefühl dafür. Und dann kann man es, glaube ich, auch ins Business einarbeiten. So.
Das sehe ich eigentlich ähnlich, und ich glaube, noch als Ergänzung, ich glaube, der erste Schritt sollte immer sein, sich zu besinnen, was braucht man eigentlich oder wo drückt der Schuh, wo liegen eigentlich meine Probleme als Verlag. Also ich würde eigentlich immer raten, eher von den Problemen her zu denken. Also wo kann ich was verbessern? Eher so denken, als irgendwie denken, okay, ich muss eine Technologie implementieren. Also ich muss auf Biegen und Brechen mich in diesen schlimmstenfalls Moloch KI begeben, weil es jeder macht. Ich glaube, das führt in die Wüste. Ich glaube, das Denken in Produkten oder in Needs, wie man so sagt, ist, glaube ich, der zielführendere Weg. Und deswegen auch gerne KI als Tool begreifen. Also das muss nicht abstrahiert werden im Sinne einer Mode oder eines großen Irgendwas, eines abstrakten Etwas, sondern kann und sollte ganz, ganz konkret sein in kleinen Schritten, da wo es gerade am meisten drückt, der Schuh.
Also immer vom Problem her denken, genau, das ist immer ein ganz guter Ansatz. Kommen wir zu eurer Kooperation. Welche Probleme adressiert ihr denn, also Probleme von Verlagen adressiert ihr denn mit eurer Kooperation? Oder anders gefragt, was sind die typischen Aufgaben, die ihr mit eurer Kooperation adressiert, Aufgaben von Verlagen?
Vom Problem her zu denken ist eigentlich echt eine gute Brücke. Lass uns mal über Herausforderungen sprechen. Problem. Und das sage ich ja immer wieder, die große Herausforderung ist, im Markt die richtigen Kunden mit der relevanten Message anzusprechen. Und das ist sicherlich in den letzten Jahren dann auch noch immer viel komplizierter geworden. Das ist ja immer das gleiche Thema, was ich sage, so das 24 Stunden am Tag, aber die Impulse sind viel, viel mehr geworden. Entsprechend hast du viel weniger Zeit, eben deinen Kunden zu treffen, deinen Kunden anzusprechen und zu einer Conversion zu führen. Und da spielt Automatisierung einfach eine wahnsinnig große Rolle. Also die richtigen Signale zu messen, festzustellen, wo ein Inhalt zu einer Umgebung, in der sich ein Kunde gerade bewegt, irgendwie passt. Und da kann KI schon wirklich enorm helfen. Und das war mir eigentlich wichtig, ne? An der Stelle halt eben Ressourcen und Kompetenzen zu schaffen, dass wir Produkte oder Features entwickeln, die unseren Kunden bei Zebralution helfen, genau das besser zu leisten. Nämlich schneller in die richtigen Plattformen zu kommen, auf die richtigen Seiten zu kommen, mit den passenden Inhalten, um am Ende zu konvertieren und zum Verkauf zu kommen. Also ökonomisch gedacht.
Genau, also direkt den Mehrwert eben für Verlage liefern, das finde ich vom Ansatz her total gut. Ralf Winkler in dem Fall, was bedeutet das konkret? Was sind das für Leistungen, die euer Tool dann für Verlage bereitstellt?
Ja, also wie Ralf schon meinte, dass die konkrete Ausgestaltung, da sind wir ständig im Gespräch. Ich kann es abstrakt formulieren. Also ich glaube, es kommt darauf an, die Inhalte wirklich semantisch zu fassen und auch verknüpfbar zu machen. Also wir kennen alle die klassische Reco von Amazon-Kunden, die das kauften auch. Damit ist man groß geworden. Das ist auch der Dreh- und Angelpunkt auch der jetzigen Zeit. Es wird immer wichtiger werden, weil, wie Ralf schon meinte, den Kunden zu verstehen und genau auf der Plattform, wo er sich gerade befindet, abzuholen mit den Inhalten, die man anbietet. Das ist dann die große Herausforderung. Und das geht halt über dieses Buch zu Buch eigentlich schon ein bisschen hinaus. Ne? Also man ist auf Instagram und wird da inspiriert und warum da nicht irgendwie auch Buchinhalte anbieten, ne? Oder zu Büchern oder Sachbüchern oder Vorlieben passen auch gewisse Events. Ne? Also wenn ich begeisterter Hörer von einem Podcast bin, Lanz und Brecht zum Beispiel, dann werden mich auch für Harari interessieren oder für generelle politische Inhalte, ne? Und das in einem größeren Maßstab verknüpfbar zu machen, als es momentan der Fall ist, wo man hauptsächlich Buch zu Buch denkt, das ist die Herausforderung. Das kann KI heute, also KI ist multimodaler geworden und das gilt es in Zukunft noch mehr zu betonen aus meiner Sicht, aus unserer Sicht und das wird wichtig sein.
Okay, da sind wir hauptsächlich wahrscheinlich beim Thema Metadaten, ne? Die Metadaten entsprechend so aufzubereiten, dass eben diese Verknüpfung, diese formatübergreifenden Verknüpfungen dann erst möglich sind.
Ja und nein, also Metadaten sind nach wie vor wichtig und die werden auch an Relevanz wahrscheinlich nichts verlieren. Sie sind freilich doch ein Stück weit auch, ohne es jetzt schmälern zu wollen, die Rolle der Metadaten, aber ein Stück der Nuller, 10er Jahre, wo man eben noch sehr schematisch hat denken müssen. Man hatte strenge Klassen gebraucht, man hatte ganz strenge, reproduzierbare, kanonische Strukturen gebraucht, die auch dann kanonisch in der Buchbranche weiterverbreitet wurden. Also der Kanonenaspekt, der wird nicht weniger werden. Aber die eigentliche Semantik eines Werkes, wenn man es im Extremfall begreift, sogar die Semantik des Hauptwerkes, des vollen Textes, des vollen Podcasts oder des Events, die spricht eigentlich schon ohne Metadaten für sich. Also diese Verknüpfung kann sehr explizit geschehen, wo immer man explizite Metadaten braucht und man eben mitspielen muss mit den kanonischen Regeln. Aber es kann für eigene Zwecke eben auch ausreichen, wenn auch schwieriger, aber es kann ausreichen, die nur semantisch zu fassen, nun in Anführungsstrichen, weil man Ähnlichkeiten schon herstellen kann, theoretisch, ohne sich rechtfertigen zu müssen als Entwickler. Also man kann sagen, dieses Buch ist ähnlich oder dieser Inhalt ist ähnlich, weil er eben ja doch die gleiche Ironie-Ebene hat oder den gleichen Stil hat. Und das kann man transparent und explizit machen, aber muss man gar nicht. Ne? Also ja.
Beim Thema oder bei der Frage, wo Verlage ihre ersten Schritte unternehmen könnten oder sollten im Bereich KI, hat Keith Rieger, dieser US-Verleger, den wir hier im Podcast hatten, sehr stark aufs Thema Marketing verwiesen. Also auch auf das Generieren von entsprechenden Marketing-Texten. Bietet ihr auch sowas in dem Bereich an? Also wir sind hier im Bereich Content, Automation, Werbetexte, sowas in der Art?
Die Gedanken gehen auf jeden Fall in die Richtung, weil dem würde ich auf jeden Fall zustimmen. Ich glaube, im Marketing ist echt ein erhebliches Potenzial für solche Anwendungen, weil es eben auch darum geht zu verstehen, wie spreche ich den Kunden denn optimal an, da wo er gerade ist. Und das ist vielleicht nicht unbedingt der Klappentext, der immer gleich ist, sondern das sind vielleicht andere motivierende Texte, ja, die ich aber auf Basis dessen, was ich habe. Und da ist Buch ja ein gutes Produkt, weil es ein textbasiertes Produkt ist, mit dem man viel anfangen kann. Das kann man sicherlich auch mit Hundefutter machen, aber da ist nicht so viel dran. Ne? So, also da ist Buch ein gutes Produkt. Aber nicht jeder Text passt überall gleich. Und eben auch da zu verstehen, was ist die Umgebung, in der ich mich gerade bewege, worauf reagiert ein möglicher Kunde besonders gut. Und das dann eben ihm auch so anzubieten, glaube ich, das spielt eine große Rolle.
Und weiter geht's an der Stelle jetzt mit unserem Interview mit Carla Herbertson. Es geht um Audio First Publishing, speziell bei Kindermedien. Viel Spaß beim Hören. Welcome, Carla.
Thank you very much for having me.
Carla, you have started working for the BBC in those days and witnessed how many radio programs have been axed. Here in Germany, we have the same trend or development. What lessons do you think can book publishers learn from the decline of radio stations?
I don't think necessarily I say radio is in decline. I think it's just reshaped. So audiences still want kind of spoken word audio. They just want it in different forms and on different platforms. So where I think the BBC went wrong was they axed a lot of children's audio programs. And if you don't nurture the future listener, you kind of lose them to other spaces. And what we're seeing now is that kids' audio is thriving everywhere else, from Yoto and Tony's to podcasts to streaming platforms. And the lesson for publishers is about kind of reframing. So don't treat children's audio as a kind of side project. Treat it as central. You know, the BBC should be doing more in this space anyway, not less. And publishers have a real chance to respond to the trend by meeting children where they already are and they are listening.
In order to support publishers in this direction, you decided to set up your own children's audio consultancy and production company. Why was that?
I was a BBC children's producer for many, many years, over 10 years, children's audio. And then I worked for startups and I worked within the kind of more the business development side of audio. Worked for as an international head of content for Zebralution, traveled the world. The pandemic hit and I saw an increase in kids' audio and platforms coming to the market. And I thought that creatively and from a business strategy, I could really offer, I could fill a gap. I could really offer a lot of help for publishers and IPs. Then my co-founder, David, he got in touch as well. He owns a studio in central London. And we just decided to kind of create Small Wardour, which is a children's audio consultancy and production company We help publishers add value and platforms add value with audio. And then we also produce a lot of creative content for platforms, and we produce our own children's podcasts.
I see. I just read a LinkedIn post of you where you pointed out that according to the National Literacy Trust, more children are now listening to audio content than reading books. What is the reason for that?
It's quite complex, but, children live in a world that's increasingly busy, digital and on demand, and audio fits naturally into their lives. It can travel with them, slot into routines, and feel less intimidating than a book on a page. For families, especially those where parents may kind of lack confidence reading aloud, or audio can offer an easy way to bring stories into their home. And importantly as well, today's children see no kind of hierarchy between listening and reading. For them, a story is a story. And now audio builds kind of the foundation for literacy by developing vocabulary, imagination, comprehension, all the skills children need to become confident readers. So it also nurtures emotional connection to storage, which is often the spark that motivates kids to pick up books themselves. And for reluctant readers and neurodivergent children, or those who learn differently, audio can remove barriers and build confidence. And in that sense, it's not a competitor to reading, it's a powerful gateway to it, really.
Children are able to listen to stories earlier than they can read a book, for example. So would you say that audio stories are so the entrance, so to speak, for your reader's journey in life, or childhood literacy?
Yeah, I think audio allows a child, it's an accessible way to read a book. So it allows a child that might be struggling to read to actually read at the same level their peers are reading. And it allows other children who are already very capable readers to read up, who might not be able to read up on the level in print, but they are going to be they can be introduced to more complex words and sentence structures within kind of the realm of audio. So yes, definitely.
You mentioned the Tonys before, and there's also the Tiger Box, I know. So these are devices that connect a device to the audio story. And especially the Tony Box is designed in a way that children can use them at very early age, so 2 to 3 years, completely by themselves. So do you think this is an approach that traditional or classic publishing houses missed, to tie a device to the audio? Or is there something else to learn from this device audio connection?
Not all publishers can create a device. Is that what you're saying? I mean, that is just not possible. But what is possible is to allow for audio not to be an afterthought, but a core part of the kind of storytelling ecosystem. So children's audio is no longer niche. We see that, Tonys, every 1 in 2 households in Germany has a Tony box. Tiger boxes, Yoto, Luni in France, Faber in Italy, they're everywhere. And this is where many young audiences are discovering stories first. And this means publishers can kind of extend reach by meeting families where they already are. So they can also kind of reimagine formats beyond simple kind of read out loud, so experimenting with audio first storytelling, interactive experiences, and they can build on kind of loyalty early. So children who fall in love with a story in audio are more likely to seek out the book, the sequel, or the series. And then it's also about kind of inclusivity and championing that inclusivity is kind of bringing audio can reach reluctant readers, neurodivergent children, and family with low reading confidence in ways print alone cannot. So for me, the kind of opportunity for publishers by looking at the kind of trend in audio is really embracing audio and not using it as an afterthought.
Yeah. So if I understand correctly, you would advise, so if I develop the stories or the products I want to sell, so think of audio in a way that they can be produced nicely for the Tonys or for the Tiger Box or for any children's audio, so they will be accessible for the families.
Exactly. And you can do that differently. You need to rethink. You can't just take the text and just go with, it's about kind of thinking about what you can add with audio or what you can take away, how you can kind of make it unique, and repackage it or retheme it or all of these things. There's so much you can do in audio. But I also obviously realize there's budget constraints and we need to, but ultimately, use audio as a bridge. So it's not to replace books, but kind of strengthening the reading culture by creating kind of more entry points for children to fall in love with stories, really.
We discussed before this conversation here the importance of voices, because I said there are particular voices I want to have when I listen to an audiobook. And because I chose my audiobooks based on the voices, because I know it's kind of voice narration I like. So because you mentioned the cost efficiency, would you say that as a publisher, it is important that I have my portfolio, for example, of, I'd say, voices for different stories that are doing kind of branding for the listeners? Or would you say voices are just one factor, and if it's possible, I can just refactor my whole backlist based on cost-efficient choice of voice? Or is both possible?
Oh, I think both is possible. I think it always starts with the book and the story. And if it's got illustrations in, a lot of children's books have illustrations. So how are you going to kind of illustrate, audioify all of that? But I think a good voice, a good narrator doesn't have to be a well-known voice, a celebrity. It helps when marketing to adults. And obviously we need to think that audiobooks are a product that will be discovered by families and friends and, grandparents, etc., and the children will be introduced to that through them. But I think the real strength in devices such as Yoto and Tony's are that the child is in charge of what they're listening to. And I think you'll find that when they're listening to, they don't care when they have a celebrity voice there, as long as the story is read in keeping of the essence of that book in mind. That's what it's all about. And obviously it needs to be read well. So I think you can do amazing reads because there's amazing actors out there, and I feel that you don't necessarily need to reach for the top actors and your budget's stretched. It just really depends per book. So if you got Harry Potter obviously is totally different to another series, and I think you just need to see who you're trying to speak to, who is your core audience and your buying audience and the listening audience. But I think you'll find the child won't care.
Yeah, but for example, with the creative Tony, it would be possible for a grandmother or grandfather to, for example, train an AI voice. So every story could be read by their voice. But of course, if I understand you correctly, this would not maybe cover the essence of the story by all means.
No, I think there is something to say for an emotional connection. So, for example, for the grandparents to read a story at bedtime at night that they wouldn't normally not be able to because they live in a different house or a different country, or so I think there's a huge kind of emotional connection there that will bring a lot to that storytelling experience that you can't deny. But I also think that it's all about the essence of what the story is about and bringing that to life correctly, and that's what will make a good audio story.
You just mentioned in the beginning that you're not doing only consulting, but production as well. What about TTS productions? Do you offer this as well?
Text to speak. No, you don't do that. No, text to speak.
You do not offer that because you're not convinced that these productions fit to your standards, or?
No, we're a traditional studio, so we don't offer AI narration. We work with actors, and we still believe in, although I very much believe that AI is part of kind of bringing audio to everybody. And I do not deny that. But as such, we still feel that, especially within the children's space, there is a huge role for human narration.
Yeah, definitely. You're right. I just tried to do a TTS production myself with an older book of mine, and it didn't work out. We had a German text with Spanish, English, Italian names, and the AI did not make it simply to read it adequately.
Yeah, there's a lot of, like Kyoto are doing something really interesting. They're working with 11 labs, and they are basically creating automated translations, which I'm really excited to kind of see. And it's really clever if you think about it, because it really allows them to judge if they need to go into new territory with their devices and what type of content will work. And for those reasons, I think it will be really interesting to see what happens in that. I also, from an internationalization perspective, having kind of worked with French publishers and creating their international strategy and really working with the French content and making it an English, American, UK content, there's a lot of nuances there that things that need to change, from sound effects to kind of the way of things are said. And there's a lot of cultural differences that, the French are quite straightforward, which you can't necessarily say things like that in the UK and in the US. So it's very interesting to see what they will do with that kind of piece of AI software, but it's very clever. So I'm not an AI denier, and I really want to embrace it. But I do also very much believe there is a space for both.
Agreed. One of your topics, or you're a proponent of audio first publishing. I've talked about this topic with Nathan Hull, for example, a lot of times.
Yeah.
Could you share some examples of successful audio-first storytelling that could inspire book publishers to think beyond the simple audiobook adaptation?
I think the most exciting opportunities come when you start with audio and then expand outwards. We've seen this happen in children's, and I want to keep it to children's. Already with two of our podcasts. So Bust or Trust is our family podcast about mysteries. Started purely as an audio first idea, designed for kind of listening, humor, debate, critical thinking, and it built a community of young listeners who engaged week after week. And that audience then became the springboard for a book. So our book's coming out next week, actually, which is really exciting. And the same is true for another one of our podcasts called Super Great Kids Stories. It began as a podcast celebrating global folk tales and grew a dedicated listenership, and then since has expanded into books as well. And these examples show that when you think audio first, considering sound design, performance, and kind of how children engage through listening, you don't just make an audiobook, you create a living story world. And that can grow naturally into print and other formats because the audience is already invested. So audio can really be like a launch pad. Start with a great listening experience, build a community of kids who love it, and then expand it into books and beyond. And that's the real opportunity for publishers. I think a lot of what we are seeing is, with the decline in maybe people picking up a book, is that what it's all about is building community and building huge, exciting stories that kids want to be part of. And that can then lead into any platform you want it to go, really.
Why is it so hard to convince publishers to try audio first?
Because I think publishing industry is quite an old-fashioned industry and set in its ways. So they need to make some mindset and process shifts. They need to start thinking with the ear in mind, so commission with the ear in mind. So too often audio is considered only after the print book exists. So we need editors and commissioning teams thinking at the very start, how will this story sound? Who's the right performer? Could this even begin live as an audio series? And then second, bring audio teams into the kind of core workflow rather than kind of leaving them on the periphery, So this like involving producers, sound designers and marketing early, not just at the end when the script is finished. And I've seen this in a lot of big publishing houses where I've consulted. And then embrace kind of what they should do is kind of embrace collaboration across platforms. So rights, marketing and sales all need to understand audio as a primary format, which they don't. They just kind of see it as an add-on. And this means that it might mean that new partnerships with podcasters and platforms and schools and just, all of this need to be formed. So, and also I think it's measuring success differently. So instead of looking at book sales, which I get, this is how they make money, track how audio builds audiences, like drives discovery and converts listeners into lifelong readers. I mean, that's quite a tricky thing to do, but I can easily say this they should do it. It's kind of building up your community of readers and starting to kind of build around imprints and having kind of, because I think, I've seen it now from the other side, having kind of created a book with a publisher. Every book, obviously, they're making thousands of books a year. So it's just one book in a long, in a big catalogue. So it's kind of how can you kind of build communities and kind of lifelong readership alongside imprints and things like that. I think they need to start looking at imprints as brands more and building that community of readers who love those type of stories and on different platforms. And I think then you'll start making a change. But I think the change really is about culture. Stop treating audio as the side product and start treating it as part of the publishing DNA. Really, I think that's where we need to go.
If I think about community, what would you say? How important are existing communities on social media platforms like BookTok, for example, on TikTok, or there's also Bookstagram or on other social media networks where people connect that are interested in books? I mean, maybe not in so far as 5-year-olds will upload videos on TikTok, but maybe for their parents to choose certain audio formats or products.
Yeah, I think is this also in relation to if we look at the popularity of BookTok, it's done an amazing thing for the kind of romance genres and the young adults and the 16 to kind of 29-year-olds. And I think it's all about kind of community-led kind of being together and enjoying something together and talking about something together. It's less about the format and more about the culture around it. So I think the lessons from kind of the success of that young adult BookTok, TikTok, is more about that readers are hungry for connection and identity and belonging. And if we want to kind of transfer that energy to younger and older groups, we need to think beyond the book itself and look at the ecosystems that make stories feel alive. So for children, that might mean kind of weaving audio, interactive storytelling, and school or library events into a culture that makes reading social and exciting. And for older readers, it could mean kind of community spaces, book club, podcasts, or formats that fit their lifestyle better. I think there's a very much a disconnect between a book and the audience, and you don't even know your audience. I think the beauty of what we've done with our podcast is the best thing is going to a live event and meeting your audience, and that is just so powerful. And then you could see that there is this kind of community that really wants to be a part of something, and I think it is hard because I'm very much against having kids on social media or kind of promoting to children on social media. So it has to go through to the parents. And therefore, there's an extra tricky layer. For 16 to 29-year-olds, it's the perfect platform. But, TikTok and Instagram are the perfect platforms for that. But I am very reluctant. Even with our accounts, we just talk to the parents rather than the children to do anything with that. So that is tricky. But if we look at creating what it is that they want, what the lesson learned from it, connection, identity, belonging. I think that's all things that, apply to the younger readers as well. So there is a lot we can do within that space to kind of create that.
Let me pick up the interactive elements or sound design, immersive sound experience you just mentioned, also as means to create community, but also to create a unique listening experience. Can you just elaborate on the role? How important will this be for future audio formats to have this interactive elements or immersive sound events? And what are the common mistakes to avoid? You already know.
Interactive elements, sound design, and original music can be the difference between just an audiobook and an audio experience. So for children especially, those elements can transform a story from something they passively hear into something they feel part of. So music can set tone, sound design brings settings and characters to life, and interactivity, even simple kind of call and responsive questions, makes the child an active participant. And that can be incredibly powerful in building attention, memory, emotional connection. But the common mistakes are that you can overproduce, so throwing in too many sound effects or music cues so that the story becomes cluttered and distracting. So it's all about knowing when silence and strong performance do more than a noisy soundscape, and then forgetting the listener's context. So children might be listening in the car, at bedtime, or a noisy bus. So if the sound mix is too complex, or if the dialogue is drowned out by effects, it kind of stops working. And treating audio as an afterthought, so taking a print text and simply layering in some random effects doesn't kind of create immersion. You need to think audio first, so pacing, rhythm, space for sound and music, and performers who can carry it really. But when done well, immersive sound and interactivity don't replace the book. They make the world of the book feel bigger and invite children to explore it in ways that, print alone can't even do. So it's a balance, I would say. And it always starts when publishers come to us and they say, oh, what do we do with this text? It just starts with the story. What is the story doing? What are the illustrations doing? How, what can we hear? I want to close my eyes, and how can I make it come alive?
But Carla, what do you think? How successful can these formats, these interactive elements and immersive sounds be if the big platforms do not support? I mean, for example, Spotify does not have immersive sound experiences so far.
Then it won't work. And I think you need to always make sure that you make something, and this is from a distribution angle, you need to be where kids are. So it starts with the content and the product, and what is it, and does it have to have immersive sound effects or just normal sound effects, and where is this child going to listen? So that context is really, really important, and where will they listen? So if you are doing something for a speaker box, and it's only for them, so an exclusive kind of production, then you can do more with that than if something is going to go out on a variety of kind of distribution platforms. And that's why I always talk to publishers that, your kind of distribution strategy goes hand in hand with your content strategy, because you need to know that wherever these kids are listening, it has to come through whatever you are trying to do. And if you're making it too wild and too much bells and whistles, it will be turned off. So that's what's really important.
You just mentioned the example of a podcast being the first step, and afterwards you develop an audiobook from that. What role could podcasts play for publishers if these podcasts often have the same topics and have a very big reach?
Yeah, I mean, they are kind of the gateway format, really, to your listeners. And it's a very easy, a conversion if you already have listeners and then you want to kind of sell them an audiobook. So, podcasts are shorter, they are free, so they're far more accessible, and they're very personal, and they fit into kind of kids' daily lives and create community, and it often sparks curiosity that leads back to books, really. If we look at, what we're trying to do with Bust or Trust, we take one mystery like the Mothman or anything, kids would want to read up about that more, and they would want to kind of seek out more information about that. So, but we also need to be realistic. Making podcasts costs a lot of money. Making money out of kids' podcasts is very, very tricky, especially in Europe with the EU and restrictions on advertising. And so, however, like I was saying earlier, it's not about just kind of creating a podcast for one book. What can we do as publishers where we take an imprint or what can we do with the reading community that we have created? And your podcast should be for that. And that would be the start. But, creating a podcast is a lot of time and effort and commitment. However, I feel it's such a powerful way to creating a community that it's well worth looking into.
Definitely. And here in Germany, for example, the publishers always think in terms of monetization, and podcast and monetization is a very tough field, right?
Yeah, it really is. But I think that's why I think from a publishing perspective, we need to look at this differently. Like I was saying, it's about the stories and how we kind of convey the stories. And there is a need to change now. More kids are listening than they are reading. So what can we do with that information? How can we entice these listeners to become readers? And if they are listening, then maybe we should create something for a world for these kids that are listening that will entice them to pick up a book, or will kind of, inspire them to kind of listen to more stories or engage with more stories. So,
what do you think about hybrid formats? For example, you have a book and the audio. You can use both at the same time, or there are also formats like the Tip Toy in Germany, where you have kind of device to use with a book to listen to something.
Yeah, I think it's all great. I think, anything that allows you to access stories however you want to access them is basically amazing. So, read along type devices for stories allows children to see the word and hear the word at the same time. So that from a literacy perspective and connection, building that kind of language connection is really, really powerful. So I think, platforms that are coming to the market, anything really, and I even feel that digital platforms, screens are getting a really hard time, because there is already so many screens around. But if a child wants to read on a screen, then it should be able to read on a screen. It's all about building a world of stories and on multi-platforms, and how can you access them and that and engage with those stories, and that will lead to books, and it will lead to other things.
So that also leads to the final question. I mean, if we look to the future, emerging technologies, voice assistant, AI-driven smart speakers, AI-driven dialogue, emotional dialogue with AI. Basically, imagine a world where you just are surrounded by AI agents with AI voices, reading every wish from your mind. How should stories change so children in 10 years may grow up in an AI-driven audio environment. So in the kitchen, they say, give me fish fingers, and the AI will prepare. So how will stories develop so children can still immerse with them, although they are in an environment that is very, very much driven by audio?
I think it allows children to create their own stories more. I think it'd be really exciting to see that. If you think about how a child grows up at the moment, even from kind of drawing perspective, they're creating their own world from a very, very young age. So to be able to maybe talk back to stories or even have characters respond to them and create new worlds. It's already happening, really. And I know there's some AI software out there, like Rivio in the US, and they kind of take a podcast series and you can create the next loop of kind of story archives and not story archives, sorry, story arcs. So yeah, I think, we can't stop the change. We just need to see it as an opportunity, and we need to see how we can kind of facilitate that so that children will engage with stories for many more years to come.
Yeah, I just have another question that came to my mind. I mean, it's going back to an answer you gave earlier because about the immersive books. And I was just thinking about a kids' theater I saw recently. It was about The Enormous Crocodile by Wardour, and it was basically a new story based on the book. And now we are looking for the audio. So the question I have now is, should musicians and authors work closer together for this immersive format, because this also offers different lines of marketing. Yeah, you could go to audiobook marketing. You could also sell the streams of the audio itself. You maybe sell it to theater or ballet or whatever suits. But yeah, maybe that's too wild.
No, it's not. I mean, God, I think that should happen already. But, I don't necessarily think that authors write for the listener yet. And I think maybe they should. And then that kind of then sees kind of because publishing should just kind of prepare by creating content that's interactive, safe, and designed to travel. So thinking beyond the audiobook to experiences that feel like play as much as reading. And I think this is from obviously a kid's perspective, but so from that perspective, if a publisher wants to commission something, it's very much a lot of the books that are commissioned are books for reading, not necessarily books for listening, not written with the listening ear in mind. And I think maybe that's the first shift that we need to make. We need to make anything, not only accessible to print, but it needs to be able to live in the world out there on different platforms, designed to travel, thinking differently. That's where we need to go.
It's a beautiful final word, I'd say.
Thank you so much, Carla.
Yeah, thank you.
You're welcome.